It's me again, Aki from Bring Forth, and this is set 22 part 3. So I'd like to discuss telepathy and how there are quite evidently two forms of communication. One is direct and another is where you involve other people in your communication. Now, I'm going to use Norse map as an example. In the direct form of communication, you intuitively realize that all the signals have to have somebody somewhere sending them. So you get in contact with the phone operator who sends the signal to the other point that the map calls an attack. And you talk with them, and then you eventually get a map of where every one of those signals are, and you can actually hear the conversation between those various points. You can deduce what they are talking about and what they are saying, and that is telepathy. You are understanding a new language. Now, in the other form, they are attacks, because telepathy always works only through direct contact, and the only way to have a direct contact is to be in the attack, because communication, all kinds of communication, is an unwanted act in the eyes of the, let's just call it the one creator, because it is a distortion. It is not the perfect being of being in a state where you don't need to communicate. It is an intrusion into your perfection, but in this reality it is a welcome intrusion to your perfection. So in the straight communication, you understand these attacks as telepathy. You understand these different groups as talking with one another. You can clearly see as you talk that some points become quiet as you talk about them and some points become loud as you talk about them. You can understand how the cultures react to your communication because you are also on the internet. You are also talking with these people. And in the other form of communication where you involve other people, you don't really understand that these are communication signals. In that form, they look like attacks. They look like different countries fighting with one another about something that never really makes sense to you because you don't understand that they're private conversations, and they can't by definition make sense to you because they are private conversations. You don't understand them. You can take part in them and perhaps be involved in them in an ephemeral way, ephemeral? Side way, in a minor way. You can perhaps involve yourself in them, but they aren't for you, so you don't ever get a full understanding of the conversation, but you can get a gist of it. So the reason this is in line with my alien contact side dialogue is because it seems that aliens don't talk to us because our weapons technology is too primitive. We don't have the methods to understand electrical conduits and electrical channels between individuals in a military way that would help, that would be understandable to them. We have weapons that are designed to be star-like, that are explosives, that don't really take into account the one-on-one violence that is inherent in the universe. The hunter and hunted paradigm has become so alien to us that we can't really understand them. So telepathy is very evident in martial arts, where you see two fighters and they are trying to get into each other's head, and you see the telepathy, you see how they are talking, and you can almost hear the words when they fight with one another. And this is telepathy. It's a primitive form of communication because the primitive weapons still exist. We have access to them, unlike our more advanced weapons, which we can't actually use in a one-on-one conversation. So telepathy is directed violence. It is the directed application of an intrusive thought into something else. You have to be able to force your mind to be intrusive for speech to become a factor. It is you have to be mean to be able to speak in a way. So telepathy is for the direct communication between individuals. You can sense from somebody else whether or not they're telepathic, and you can understand from them if they aren't why they aren't, and you can understand from them if they are as to why they are. But in the indirect form of communication, you have to involve others, and you can't know about the motivation of those others. So perhaps in the religious talk, it is more common to talk from one to one, and in the scientific talk, it's more common to talk from group to group. So telepathy is an attribute or an aspect of the human communication that will, in time, become something that we understand, but it was something that we had in the past. We don't have it anymore. We've lost the ability because we have become so inert, so inbuilt into systems and corporations and societies and clans and group identities that we've lost the telepathic ability. But it's still there. It just has to be forced to the surface, and it has to be understood as applied violence. It has to be understood as the harshness of one actually taking the effort to understand how somebody else's mind works and then cut through all those little bits and get to the really important part. I don't really know what else to say about this, but that is my view on telepathy. It is present, and the reason why we aren't getting the kind of alien contact that we're looking for is because we have insufficient weapons technology. We don't have the complexity in our direct communication to be able to convey the complexity that's associated with language. We have hunches because our weapons are still so primitive. We don't have what we would need in terms of weapon technology to understand or organize our communication. Now, I occasionally see groups being able to channel a being so that, for example, an army group of 250,000 soldiers can channel a fly. They have the same amount of neurons, and their individual connections with each other are the same as in a fly. They are the same mass. But even the largest human groups don't come close to being a human brain. They are at most perhaps something like a dog brain. And this is just because we are still so primitive. We don't have, the largest society that we have doesn't have the same amount of neurons as one individual human, so we haven't really graduated as a society to be able to use telepathy in a way that would make sense to any alien. They would see us as so simple that it would be like talking to a baby. Most people wouldn't go through the effort, and then some people read Shakespeare to babies and they are kind of viewed as, well, most people babble to babies because they think that the baby mind is so simple that it can't understand. So telepathy is more common in direct societies, in societies where communication between individuals is on a one-to-one basis. And it's much more rare in communities and in societies where people communicate through communities. So I don't really know what to say about that, other than that it is fairly self-evident once you really think about what you're seeing. And as to my power production model about the aliens and their different power sources and how they would possibly go about doing their business, I would say that one of the reasons we are so hesitant to adopt a similar model in the world, where there are these tiers of energy production, each associated with one order of magnitude less waste and less power requirement than one before it, where the last one is just basically willpower power, and the first one is basically coal or something really hard and diamond-like. In such a model, the top energy will be gravity energy, or energy from just gravity itself, which is geothermal energy, because it tends to organize heat into its interior that you can channel into by building long pipes. This is almost universal in geothermal. But the highest form of geothermal life form that you can see, that your imagination clearly makes for you to understand, is a being of fire, a being of fire living in fire and making energy from fire. And that is against our religious leaning and ideology to be in cahoots with the beings of the fire. So it is kind of simple to understand why why we would object to this model, much like in the Childhood's End novel. We would have a intrinsic inbuilt association with evil to fire in most of our societies, where the societies of fire generating energy is considered evil. It is considered free to the point of being sinful. So that is probably why we are still in the childhood stages of our civilization. We don't really want to understand civilizations that communicate with more efficient weapons and live in an eternal fire. It's hard for us to conceptualize those civilizations as good, and it is easy to conceptualize those civilizations that try to strive away from gravity and actually are the mass of the society and world as good, even though they are actually bad because they are constantly making sure that others are beneath them, because they don't want to start at the lowest level of society. It is annoying, one might say, but perhaps there is some other way to do this. I have not found it, at least. So society is living in fire, making energy from fire, and then trying to be the lowest possible life form in the pyramid, and always avoiding the top of the pyramid, because the top of the pyramid always seeks to run away from gravity and then gets stuck in its own gravity well and dies because it has no mirrors to reflect itself. So gravity energy from being the lowest possible point in the pyramid. Anyway, that is a good conversation, and I hope we all learned something. Perhaps gravity energy and crop circles really do go together. Fascinating watching this device talk. So that's all on crop circles and the associated stuff.